So Tracy has a really unique kind of story, right? That I don't know that I've heard too much. Do you want to surmise as to what's going on? I know that, well, okay, two things. First of all, why don't you just kind of introduce yourself and tell us, you know, why you're a midwife, what your passion is, like what's going on with it. And then I have a few sort of classic, you know, questions, which are what's the best birth experience, you know, you've had? What's the worst birth experience you've had? And then I'd love to cover what you think is going on with Tracy. And I know that, you know, you people kind of sometimes seek you as a midwife these days when, like psychologically, like when there's other things going on. I'd love for you to just kind of speak about that, just your own personal, like what you're seeing. So, so first, yeah, who are you? How'd you get into this?
So my background is I was a paramedic. I was a medic for about 4 years. I was on my way to medical school, and then my oldest baby decided to come earlier than I anticipated. And I started out with a regular OB. I didn't know about this alternative world. And after about 3 months, I realized I wasn't being heard. And then I found my midwife.
You were being heard in what way?
I felt like my OB had her hand on the doorknob the entire time. She'd come into the room and never left her hand. And it was this whole sense of like, I have to keep her in the room and have her answer whatever questions I had. And I was young, and it was my first baby, and there was just a lot of unknown.
So an unengaged type of, like
absolutely.
The classic doctor experience of 5 minutes or hurry up
Absolutely,
or something like this. Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah, and then I discovered what it is to birth in a hospital and what that means. And
with your first?
Which I did not,
oh,
but
okay,
I was investigating that and realized that the moment the baby's born, there's a detachment that has to take place to accommodate their protocols. And I wasn't interested in that. So I birthed my son at the birth center and fell in love with midwifery and what it had to offer. And so I started school. I went to midwifery school with him tied to my back. I had 3 other children at home after him. I've been practicing for 13 years.
Okay.
What was it?
So yeah, so you got into this with your own experience.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, and you were sort of passionately taken with the difference in the two worlds.
Completely. My birth experience with my oldest formed who I needed to be his mother, and because it was such a deep, connected process of feeling all of his process of being born, it was a rebirth of myself. And that's kind of my thing, that the baby is just like this icing on the cake, but it's birthing yourself in that process. That you go from, you know, kind of this plain old person to this really empowered woman after that, when you're able to feel all of this.
Good word.
Yeah.
Where does that rank on the emotional guidance scale? Empowerment, there we go. All right, cool. So I think let's lead into your, you know, like who you deal with, the type of people that come to you sometimes. Mm-hmm. Is that true? I could be kind of misinterpreting.
Yeah. I think all midwives kind of call who it is that needs to come to them. There's some midwives that, you know, maybe with VBAC, that's really their passion, that's their specialty. There's other women who attract a very young clientele, a very older clientele, an affluent clientele. Most of my clientele comes from abuse. I do a lot of work with human trafficking and walk a lot of those women through their birth process. I would say probably 80% of my clientele has had some really significant history that for sure comes up in the birthing process. That's all those demons come up, and they have to walk through that, and that's kind of what I...
Yeah, so perfect. So tell us about what that looks like, and maybe that's like, the next questions are the best and the worst type of birth experience. So what are these, I guess the worst one is where we're at right now.
That was like last week.
Last week.
Yeah. Well, as far as what it looks like, abuse coming up, You know, it's in order to birth a baby, you have to obviously become incredibly vulnerable. You have to open not just your body, but you have to open, you know, mind, body, spirit, and you have to feel incredibly safe. And women who have had this type of history, it's very hard for them to feel safe. And most of the world is unsafe to them. And so these women will birth in closets. These women will stay on their hands and knees through the whole process and like kind of be very primal. They're usually nonverbal during their whole labor process, or what sounds as inappropriate. So probably how they cried when they were little girls and they were being abused. And so that's...
So this stuff comes out
Absolutely.
in the labor process,
Absolutely.
and you're there with them, kind of watching this happen.
Yeah, my greatest role as a midwife, of course, I have to, you know, look at the medical aspect, and I have to make sure that they're within normal limits and that the baby is doing well, there's no distress, but probably more important than that is I have to hold space. And I have to really keep them safe. I have to keep out whoever it is, even if it's this really connected partner who, whatever reason, is triggering, you know, this predator they had in their life, and that's also part of my job, is to get him into a place of comfort to move, to be able to hold space for her.
Okay. Okay, so do you have a specific example of a, you know what, actually, let's move into it and see if we come back there. Maybe we'll come back there. But why don't you then go to the other side and say, so you deal with a lot of very special cases and see some interesting things in birth, and clearly the mental emotional component can hold back a birth.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what does holding back a birth really look like?
Rigidity. Usually it looks very rigid. It's physically being rigid. It's pulling away from the pain. You know, we want to shorten, you know, this, you want to shorten your body in labor as far as, especially towards the end, where you want to kind of come into this baby that's going to come out. And so a lot of women who've been abused have resistance to that. You see a lot of this posturing. They're trying to actually get away from themselves, kind of have this out-of-body experience. Or they could be totally checked out. Whatever their coping mechanism was through their abuse, you know, some women will just totally disconnect, and you cannot find them at all. And because they're fearful to come into their body, they're fearful to have those triggers of that physical pain.
And so that would then manifest to, how does dilation happen? How does like is this preventing their birth? Is it preventing?
Sure. I mean, there's.
So would you say that when this sort of stuff happens, she's more likely going to go to a C-section type stuff, right? And,
absolutely.
Okay, so
absolutely, yeah.
How have you worked people through that? This could be like good story time.
Naming it sometimes. Sometimes women have, they do not make the connection at all, and their perspective is, oh my God, labor is so intense. These contractions are so powerful, I cannot do it, where it's just an extension of who we are. You know, these contractions aren't superimposed, it's who we are. And so to maybe name that, well, what you're experiencing, it's coming from back here. It's not truly what's taking place here. So that then they could kind of put it into perspective.
So mentally, this is like saying, this is what happened to you. It's outside of there. This is what's happening now. So you do a lot of mental emotional coaching, obviously.
Absolutely, yeah.
And have you seen obvious circumstances of, you know, the dilation then happening afterward, or the baby coming? So tell us about one of those.
For sure. I actually had a client that, this was years ago. Years, maybe it's probably 10 years old now, where the mother was in labor for probably a good 24 hours and appeared to be, you know, a good quality of contraction, a good frequency, a good duration. It all appeared to be that. And she was exhausted, she was frustrated, she was terrified.
Terrified of what?
At the time I didn't know. I walked into her birth. I had no previous exposure to her. She was a birth center client. Oftentimes I wouldn't see, you know, have the continuity of care with birth center clients. And she was literally on her hands and knees and just kind of crawling around. And I was working with another midwife, and she told me to, call her if something changes. This has been status quo for the past 12 hours. And I was in there, and for me, the signals of that she wasn't verbal, that she was, she kind of had these like really shifty eyes. She carried fear in her eyes. That after all this time, she was getting close to surrendering and to take me to the hospital, cut this baby out. And so I was kind of next to her, crawling around on the ground with her, and just intuitively said, he's not here. He's not here. You have to know that you're safe. He's not here. And she started going into this processing, and her husband was in the room, and I asked him to leave. And she was stuck at 4 centimeters for certainly 12 hours at the birth center, who knows how long prior to that.
Which is how
10
out
is
of
complete.
The ordinary is that? To be stuck at 4 centimeters for 12 hours?
Yeah, it's definitely,
way out of the range of normal.
Absolutely.
What's the normal dilation rate?
Every 2 hours you should do a centimeter.
1 centimeter every 2 hours, okay. So she's a good 6 centimeters behind right now.
Completely. And like I said, completely exhausted. And I just kind of started leading her through, you're 32 years old, you're not that little girl anymore. Tell him to get out of here. He does not belong in your birth. Send him away wherever that man was. And she went from 4 to her baby in her arms in probably about 15 minutes. After that, yeah.
Yeah, that's a good story.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
What about Tracy?
Just to disclaimer, Tracy does not come from that type of abuse because she was with me. So, actually, when I was in the cesarean with her, and her baby was so wedged up into her pelvis that, I don't know if you remember that.
Wedged up into the, you mean high above?
No. Down,
into
like
the pelvis.
into the pelvis.
So like engaged
towards the right, asynclitic.
What does that mean?
With instead of the presenting part being here, the baby was like presenting here, just smashed up in there. That the physician.
Both were, okay.
Actually, I didn't know that Carter was. He had to use so much leverage to pull this baby out that he was well over the curtain, and like, I could not believe he had this whole stance, and it was a tense moment where there was just, the baby was so impacted that was not coming underneath the pelvic arch.
Any sense to make of that, or any
I think
thoughts?
Anatomically, just.
Anatomically?
Yeah. Yeah, because
like small pelvis or frame.
Small
somehow?
pelvis. Also coming down asynclitic doesn't allow the baby to have that flexion and extension that the baby needs. And Tracy was an amazing, completely surrendered in her labor. Was completely peaceful with it. Was, had no resistance whatsoever. She's, has a very, her basis is very strong, and she, I think physically probably, I know you say how depleted you were, probably could have gone another 12 hours. As far as her stamina is really impressive, and her ability to take this discomfort, but there was just the baby wasn't descending at all. There was no movement.
Do you ever kind of lump emotionally babies who don't descend into any rationale for that? I know that, like we were talking about emotionally and how fast, and your story is amazing.
Yeah.
It's 15 minutes, right? Any other things along with that?
Yeah, there's this theory that if you get stuck at, I'm going to completely misquote this, 4 centimeters and 7 centimeters, that 4 centimeters is a fear of labor, 7 centimeters is a fear of parenting. Yeah.
Crazy, right?
Yeah, so there's certainly that, it's amazing the amount of control that we have. Some women who are incredibly athletic and have squatted themselves silly for the past 10 years have such a taut pelvic floor, that it just doesn't allow for a baby to descend, or for them to have that comfort in releasing that pelvic floor and to feel the pressure, that they're so used to having everything tight. You know, that definitely can come into play.
Okay. Yeah, it sounds like the art of what you have to do is determine if there's a problem, if it's not progressing regularly, is to determine when is it truly that need for the C-section, and when is it a mental, emotional thing that she can work through.
Absolutely, and then to, you know, take the baby into account with that, because a baby is only going to tolerate, you know, a position without progression for so long, and then the baby asks for help, and you don't want to wait until the baby's asking for help, because then you're in distress.
And that's your art. And then, just for the sake of this class, is it fair to say that the art going on in the hospitals and the doctors are less likely the way it's set up? Like, you really build a relationship. You as a midwife build a relationship with this person.
Absolutely.
And that's pretty stark difference from what's going on in most doctor settings. Like, if this woman, you know, who you said, you know, get him out, if this woman was in a hospital, it's just kind of unlikely that there would be someone to kind of work through that with her, unless she brings a doula or brings her own.
Even then, the rigidity of the hospital, there's just, in fairness to physicians, I think that they practice in a place of fear. You know, we are so quick to sue, you know, and so all of the majority of their decisions are from this place of fear or this risk analysis. The nurses are so depleted and so overworked, and what they have to do is unbelievable. You know, and so, you know, oftentimes they only have the availability to make sure that they are medically safe, you know, and that's, you know.
That's kind of the system there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you monitor the baby?
We do intermittent monitoring, so with a Doppler, a handheld Doppler. And no, instead of that, what's strapped, because it's a one-on-one situation, I have the ability to listen and then back off and listen. And so I listen for 6 seconds at a time, depending on the stage of labor. You know, in active labor, I listen for every 15 minutes. When we're pushing, after every push. But that gives the availability for the mom to be in the shower, birth in the water, wherever they choose to be, hands and knees on their back. Where in the hospital, another reason why it's so difficult to achieve a natural birth in the hospital is because you're on your back. And it's such a difficult place to be when you're in pain that you can't move with the baby and with whatever your body's asking you to do.
Yeah, it's pretty standard in hospital to put you on your back, and that's your delivery position. And whereas what you do with women is you allow them what?
Anywhere, everywhere, however.
It's a pretty stark difference.
Yeah, I've delivered babies in unbelievable positions where I come out and I can't even like straighten out because I've been like this for so long holding the perineum. Like.
How about, obviously you're not allowed to C-sect, you're not trained in that, that's not your job. You are trained though for episiotomy as Pitocin and epidural? Not epidural.
No epidural. I don't use Pitocin to augment labor, which is to shift a labor pattern, but I can use it postpartum for hemorrhaging.
Only postpartum Pitocin for hemorrhaging. And that helps by, how does that help?
It clamps down the uterus, and so it usually a uterus could come into postpartum hemorrhaging from very prolonged labor. The uterus is just simply tired. By the time the baby comes out, it just gets really boggy, and you need something to really pull it together.
Is that after or before the placenta is delivered?
It could be either. It could be either.
Okay. And it's to stop bleeding. Yeah.
Go ahead. What do you recommend to do with the placenta?
Encapsulate.
To encapsulate it?
Yeah.
So explain that.
All mammals eat their placenta. Everything that we
all mammals eat their placenta.
We're the only ones that don't.
Let's not glance over that for a second.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
So everything that the mother is depleted of, all the nutrients, everything, usually women can become anemic after birth. Certainly you're sleep deprived, having this baby, being up for however long your labor took. postpartum depression, even just being bluesy. It also helps with milk production. There's lots of different ways that you can ingest your placenta. You could straight up cook it like liver. You could put it in smoothies. Most often, people have it encapsulated, and then they take like 6 pills a day. But it's amazing. It's also like a great tool that if we've used all the drugs that we carry with us and we still have bleeding, and if we have a mom that's getting shocky from the blood loss, we'll cut a piece of the placenta off and stick it in their cheek, and they stop bleeding. It's incredible. Mm-hmm.
Why is that? Is there any reason why? Is some of this stuff like kind of scientific?
It's oxytocin. Yeah.
Oxytocin.
It's oxytocin
inside the placenta.
in the placenta. So that's what Pitocin is, and it's just really absorbed very quickly. And it's also, there's no processing of it because it's come from your body. So there's no converting of it.
Sorry, you know the difference between my son I had to have the drug afterwards because both my sons had blood type the same as the husband.
Oh,
Rogan, that's it. So I had to have the shot before and after. Mm-hmm. So would the placenta still be able to be ingested like that, even though
because that's yours.
It's my blood?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is there? I had a couple questions for you. Let me see. I'll move to this one because I can't remember the other one. But is there any sort of? Okay, I remember being at my maternity center once, mm-hmm. and it was Becky who tried to break the sac, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. So what do we call that again?
Rupture the membranes.
Yeah, rupture the membranes. Mm-hmm. Okay. So, and I remember her distinctly saying, "Man, I can't mm-hmm. get it. Mm-hmm. That only happens with you people who have such great nutrition." Mm-hmm. What is your experience with nutrition in general?
True, also that it creates a thicker membrane, which is more protected for the baby. Also, having your waters break later in labor, it keeps the baby safer. Once the water is released, we're on a clock because now it's an open system and the baby potentially could become septic, or the mom. It also tends to help with pain management, having that little bit of cushion instead of just the baby's head right on the cervix. So yeah, definitely good nutrition builds also a larger placenta, a more lush.
So I delivered on call with my second, and the midwife said she hadn't, it was like a second one that she'd done. Mm-hmm. But I really wish I'd seen him in it. Is it something you just have to get the baby out quickly, or could she have lifted him up in the sack?
She could have. The fear is that the baby is going to come into its breathing reflex, and that if the baby takes in the membrane, and then it could be an intrusion to the breathing. Usually not, but I think it's a hard thing to resist. Because you want to open it and you want this baby to start breathing. So yeah, it's good luck. It's supposed to be known as good luck.
So do you recommend, or when would you recommend to break the sac, for example?
When the baby does it. When the baby does it.
That's inside.
Oh, you mean like in the car when the baby's born? Yeah, I mean, within 20 seconds of birth, you probably should, 20, 30 seconds.
Is that your question?
So you're still in labor, so you're saying you should never break the sac? You wouldn't, there's no situation where...
I'm very reluctant to break the bag. Strong contractions, descent of the baby usually will do that. I'm very...
Would you at that point, or no?
No, unless the mother's complaining of extreme pressure and the bag is a bulging bag and it's really presenting in front of the head, I might, but if the mother is not asking for it, I won't do that.
Can you talk about you've been waiting. Okay. You go ahead.
You said that you were trained to give an episiotomy. Mm-hmm. How often do you have to do that, and why would you do it?
I've never done one. I did it in school. I've never done one in my own practice.
Wow.
Never.
And then after the baby's born, when you're in the hospital, typically you hold the baby for a few minutes and then they take the baby to be monitored. At home, that's not happening. So how is the baby monitored after? Is there any monitoring?
Right on the mom's chest.
But then when does the baby go? I mean, eventually the baby has to be looked at and...
Well, I'll do a newborn exam, usually 3 hours postpartum, right next to the mom, like on her skin.
Until the first checkup at the pediatrician, or if the baby goes to the pediatrician.
For like a subsequent, I come back to the home at 24 hours, and then I also do an assessment on the baby. I believe very strongly in honoring that unit, the mother-baby unit, and not causing any separation there. I just had a birth where it was a full resuscitation, and we resuscitated right on the mom's chest. I really believe that...
Will you explain what that means? You just did a birth where it was a full reset. That means the baby wasn't breathing?
This baby came out the most lifeless child I've ever seen.
The most lifeless child you ever saw?
Yeah, this baby was had a heartbeat, primarily because the baby was attached to the cord, because we don't cut the cord right after birth. We had to quickly move into a full resuscitation, which means that we bagged the baby with the ambu bag and doing heart compressions.
Like basically CPR stuff?
Absolutely, CPR, yeah. And what I have with me is a cutting board to provide a hard surface so that we're not going into, a bed or something soft, so that we have that resistance. I put the cutting board right on the mom's chest so that she's able to kiss the top of the baby's head, hold the baby's hands, call this baby into its body. And that's how I do it. I feel very strongly a baby that's making a decision to come here or not. When you separate from its mother, it gives up. And so I will keep them as attached as possible.
And so what happened? The baby...
So what happened was rescue was called at 2 minutes postpartum. Rescue somehow didn't get dispatched properly, and they didn't come until 22 minutes postpartum. And my sister and I were doing a full code. They came with a really incomplete crew, and so there was only one lead medic. So I had to ride in with the baby.
So the baby still is not breathing at this point? Or
correct.
Okay, so for 22 minutes, no breathing.
But you keep at 37
connected.
minutes. Well, at transport, we had to finally cut. So that was at 24 minutes postpartum. We cut the cord, put the baby on the stretcher. I jumped on top of the stretcher to continue doing compressions. He was at the head, bagging the baby. We went into the ER that way. It was about 37 minutes in the ER, and they were working him. They finally were able to get an airway. They're having a very hard time getting an airway and intubating the baby. And by the grace of God, this baby is going to be discharged probably tomorrow from the hospital. Yeah.
Did mom travel with the baby to the...
We ended up transporting her in the truck behind. No,
behind?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, but you got him to the hospital, or they got him to the hospital?
Yeah, he was just cleared on his MRI. There's no brain damage, thank God. And he's really intact, yeah. I think that he got stem cells, which really helped with brain development. I think that we also, my assistant and I work a really efficient code. And
what does that mean in code?
We work an efficient code, so
and this is you and your assistant, or what's the word you're using?
Yeah, my assistant.
Oh, your assistant, okay. And
who happened to be another midwife.
Okay.
We just, you kind of get influxes of what comes to you, so you'll get like a ton of postpartum hemorrhaging, and then you get really good at postpartum hemorrhaging, and then you get a ton of shoulder dystocias, and you get really good at that.
Shoulder dystocias are?
Usually it's the anterior shoulder that is caught behind the pubic symphysis, and so the head is delivered, and you can't get the shoulders out, which is terrifying.
Okay.
And so, so I've done that, and now I'm on my...
now you're on your resuscitation?
Now I'm on my resuscitation, and so we had done enough resuscitations that when it came time to this one, that we worked a very efficient one. And
you're doing, any thoughts on why babies are needing to be resuscitated?
I don't know, but I've just asked the whole universe to clear me of that I've passed, that I don't want anymore.
Wow.
We'll go back to hemorrhaging, I'm okay with that.
When the shoulder's stuck, you have to just,
Yeah, it's intense. It's really intense, yeah, because the thing is, there's a little reassurance emotionally that if you have a hemorrhage or you have a resuscitation, that help will come. we don't expect them 22 minutes later, but they will come and they are as equally or more so trained in this. And you know, the paramedics are great about throwing in IVs very quickly, you know, doing all this, they're fantastic. Shoulder dystocias, there's nobody else. It's me. And so they'll transport while I'm still trying to get the baby out.
Wow, yeah.
And once we get to the hospital, then we have to wait for an attending OB to come in and take over. But there's a lot of manipulation that we have to do. There's different steps, there's different positions that we put the mom in to try to release this shoulder. Worst case scenario is, I hate saying this in front of a pregnant woman, all these horribles.
Yeah. Go watch Business of Being Born after this or
Yeah,
something.
but we break the clavicle to get the baby out.
So one of the things that, you know, this course is really founded upon that if we get our foundational health in order, we're less likely to have these issues. And we even have like some quotes from the guy in the 1920s, Weston Price, I don't know if you're familiar with him.
Course,
and
yeah.
he has these quotes about how pregnancy is easy and birth is easy, and then they eat these foods and now it's a big problem. Well, I don't know, is there a trend that you've seen? And it's tough to get research like this because everything's so like, this causes that. It's not like so general and holistic. But, you know, our suggestion is if you're breathing diaphragmatically, these are the foundations. If you move on a regular basis, you know, like daily, if your nutrition, your lifestyle, and then your thoughts, your mental, emotional, if you're checking those foundations, that we're going to be able to help our clients to birth naturally.
Sure.
And I'm curious what your thought is on, have you seen trends? Have you seen women who you know, have these things kind of functioning tend to work out better or not? I mean, what does your experience show? Do you even look at that world in that way?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I don't know, 13 years is long enough to really see like these defined trends, but I think moderation, you know, I've seen just as many like clients who haven't moved their body in their entire lifetime have challenging problems versus, you know, the weightlifting, you know, client that is so defined that doesn't know how not to be. You know, pregnancy is soft. Pregnancy, there has to be a softness that you embrace. That's part of the surrender.
Sort of like a balance or a middle ground.
Yeah.
As opposed to being fitness fanatic or completely amnesiac of their body. Okay.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, so okay, that's a similar trend in this class, is that if you're totally not connected or if you're over-connected, it's not going to work out, so there's a balance. Okay.
Keeping clients out of their head is a big one.
Yeah, so clearly, in terms of thoughts, that's where you see the most trend. Like if you can get a woman to get into the right place of mind, she's going to birth well.
Right.
Or better.
And I think that trumps the body most times.
And I would,
you know,
I would
unless there's
agree with
something
that.
anatomical, but most times I think that does.
Yeah. Yeah, so the power of the mind can overcome any of the other things that we may not have going. And of course, the suggestion in this class is try to get all the things working, you know, like let's coach everyone in that direction. What else is coming? I know you had a question.
I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about how you've gotten really good at holding space for people, because I feel like we all aren't at your level with that, but at the same time we can come home and really have a client that we bring home with us. So how do you get good at that?
Oh, to release the client at the end of the day? I do, after every birth, I kind of do like a ritual, like I'll wash my hands in a way that I'm like physically wanting to take the energy, you know, off of them. You know, I have 4 children, so I come home to that, and I'm very conscious about what it is that I want to bring to them. I also do, the water for me is something that's very healing. So if I have something that's really, like this birth where I resuscitated the baby, I went from the hospital to the ocean. And that, I needed that before I integrated back into my home. I do like fire rituals where I'll get paper, and you know, it's fantastic to be able to build this amazing fire outside and do it outside. My availability is like this to do that. And so I will just light a candle and have a bowl of water next to it, and I will tear this paper up, and whatever it is that I am holding, that maybe regret or fear or anger at a client or whatever it is, frustration, that I will breathe into, ball up the paper, put it in my hand and breathe into it, whatever it is that's coming up with that emotion, and try imagining it releasing from my body into this, and then I light it on fire and put it in the water. And for me, that visual and that blowing is a release for me.
Yeah, I just feel like there's such a fine line between feeling empathy and getting somebody, and then being able to detach that, you know, without being hard, you know, or going into a session open enough, you know, if you've had bad previous.
Yeah, creating boundaries around that, you know, I have some clients that will, you know, call me and tell me they have a headache at 3 in the morning. You know, that's not okay. You know, and I let them know that's not okay. You know, and there's boundaries around it so that, you know, for myself and my children, but also so that I could then go to them clean at our next visit and not be like, oh, called me at 3 in the morning? Like, I'm sitting here listening to you? I don't want to hear you. I'm really pissed.
Yeah, so to connect it to this class, I'd say that Dana has, she has ways, whether, you know, we learned meditations and things, and she's using her own ways to shift her mental, emotional status about, you know, what's going on in her work and clearing herself. One, does that?
No, yeah.
Cool.
I just feel like that's so important.
It's, yeah, it really is. And it's walking the walk, because if you're trying to teach this lifestyle and health, which is emotional health, which is spiritual health, all of that, you have to walk it, you know. And so just to sit in a 1-hour session and this is what you should do, and then you go home and you fall apart, that's not really serving anybody.
A big question that I want to make sure we get to here is, we ask the question of which is failing. You know, we have the system or the woman's body, and we have C-sections, and you know, we just have surgeries going on and drugs going on, and apparently, even though we at one point in human history were able to birth relatively, you know, easily, we now are at a point where we've gone through, you know, we were having lots of challenges with that. And so what's failing, the system or the woman's body? And what largely we're talking about in here is that, well, the system clearly of hospital births doesn't work so well to foster natural or easy birth. And also there's these 5 foundations that happen to be out of sync with most of the modern population. You know, the fact is that we're not getting good sleep, we're highly overstressed, we're poor nutrition, we're not breathing right, and we're not moving in the way we should be. And so that's combining to make a 33% rate of C-section, right? And then various, you know, depending on which country.
67 at some of these hospitals here.
67, yeah, in many of the hospitals here. And depending which country you look at, 20 to 80%, you know, and stuff, or 80 might be a little bit high, 20 to 60, I should say, although there's a lot of talk of hospitals being up at the 90% rate and stuff like this. And so the question is, how often are you transferring for a C-section? What is the rate that ends up? I believe, I don't know if you know, maybe you can speak to what Miami Maternity Centers was or still is, or what are we finding in terms of people who are trying to have natural births or home births, or, you know, what is the transfer rate?
I'm probably about I haven't done my stats, maybe a year or so, probably about an 8%.
8%?
Yeah.
That's very fine. And now, do you accept high risk, low risk, medium, where do you,
and
what is a high risk? Oh, I'm sorry.
No, I have across. I have across the board.
You do.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's not always the case.
Low
actually.
risk, as far as you have to qualify. You have to be a certain level of health to be in midwifery care. I have a very good relationship with my backup physician, so a lot of clients that are teetering, he will allow them to be in my care.
And that's actually a really good point to not skip over, is that you have a backup physician. In other words, you work hand in hand with a doctor that you already have a relationship with. So it's not like it's a mystery of where you're going to go if you have to transfer. We already know the plan is set.
Right, I could call him at 4 in the morning and say, Doc, we're coming in, and he meets us at the hospital.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And he is fantastic. He is Dr. Mark Spence. He works out of North Shore. Amazing, gentle, kind, respectful. He's a very good man. Very good physician.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so continue. Okay, so an 8% transfer rate. Okay, that's it. What about other similar midwives? Is that a trend? So you're accepting everything, like we can call it high risk. What is high risk? Are you accepting preeclampsia and things like that? Isn't it?
Just had a preeclamptic client.
You did? Okay, yeah. So you really do span the spectrum.
Yeah.
So high risk, low risk, you're getting about an 8% transfer. That's pretty amazing. That's not 33%, obviously.
Right.
Now the mindset of the woman is clearly for a natural birth if she's come to you. So,
or she's had a horrible hospital experience.
And so
she's just running from that and not really committed to being at home or to have this midwifery experience, but no, she doesn't want that.
Interesting.
When you say 8% transfer rate, you don't necessarily mean not all of those are getting C-sections, correct?
Correct.
Oh, okay.
Correct.
So you 8% transfer. Oh, great. So then
yeah, that may mean that we need Pitocin. That may mean pain management.
What is the end up C-section then, right?
I don't know. It's funny because I just bumped up against Dr. Spence, and he was like, "When was the last time you were in the OR with me?" Which has been a while.
Yeah. Off the top of your head, is it more like above 50% or below 50%?
Of that 8%?
Of that 8%?
It's probably close to 50% of that.
What stat does that remind us of?
The people that died. Wasn't that the infant mortality?
In all the infant mortality stats, we have the magic percentage seems to be under 4. 3.9, 3.7, 4% is what the 2005 British Journal of Medicine said. This is really interesting because what we're trying to get at, like, how many really need at this point in history with the way that our women's bodies are, our human bodies, how many actually need a C-section, and 4% keeps popping up. And you've just sort of given us half of your 8% gets C-sected. Well, there's the 4% again.
Yeah.
That's pretty amazing.
What sort of postnatal care do you provide besides, after that initial 24 hours?
So I do a 24-hour visit, a 3 to 5 day visit, a 10-day visit, a 3 weeks, and a 6 weeks. And then we also provide postpartum groups, support groups. Yeah.
And do you work with like multiples, like when a woman's pregnant with multiples?
I can manage the pregnancy, but it's illegal in Florida to birth out of hospital with multiples. And breech is illegal out of hospital.
Breech. And can you do maneuvers to turn the baby, or at some point?
There's a lot that we can do. If we have a baby that I can't turn, that different techniques that we do with the mom, acupuncture, chiropractic care, then I'll send to my backup physician and he'll try to do a version. He does it in the OR, but he will try to externally turn the baby.
And is there any exercises that can be prescribed to the woman so that the baby can turn on its own?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. There's the cat-cow. There's L position, where you're in a handstand in a 90-degree angle with your feet on the wall. There's also side-lying release, where you lay on the side of the bed and you kind of dangle your opposite leg over you. There's different pressure points. There's moxa that you could burn by the ankles. Yeah.
Headstands. Yeah, it's funny you say handstand, because that's oftentimes talked about in fitness that we shouldn't do that.
As a contraindication in pregnancy.
Oh, there you go. Think outside the box. Is there anything final that you'd like to, just leave us with?
How do you pick a midwife?
How do you? Interview. You interview them. It's amazing because Miami doesn't do a lot well. We do out of hospital birth very well. And there's collectively about 5 of us who, colleagues, and we all have this attitude that, there's absolutely no competition whatsoever, because given the choice, that client will be drawn to whatever midwife is truly meant to be part of that journey with them. And so if I have a client who interviews with me and ends up choosing one of my colleagues, then it's such a beautiful feeling that she found her midwife. Like that's fantastic, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty amazing. Okay.
Yeah, I have a space on 71st Street on Miami Beach.
I think my friend Kim Singer,
Okay, so there's two different maternity centers, or that we're talking about. One is the Miami Maternity Center, which is where your experience was with this woman, right?
Yes.
And then there's the place that Dana's just opened up, which to date has not even had a birth in it, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. We're still going through all of that. So my practice right now is a home birth practice. Hopefully within the next few months, we'll be accredited to have births in my center.
So at the moment you just go to the homes. Yeah. Amazing.
Which is so much more beautiful. Truly, the reason that I'm opening as a birth center, I don't necessarily believe in birth center births, because if you're going to be in a birth center, you might as well be at home. It's the exact same equipment, same setup, all of that. But because I do have a lot of the human trafficking population, and so instead of them birthing in the Motel 6 where it's dirty and they're scared, to come into my space, which is more welcoming.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you so much
You're welcome.
for coming and being here.
I appreciate you guys all being interested in this.
Yeah.